Hi everyone, I'm Lisa Gillespie, and in this little practice sequence, we're going to run through some of my favorite exercises for strengthening the glutes and also helping you have better access to using the glutes in your daily activities, especially your squats and your walking. So we'll get started with a hip flexor stretch. Your hip flexors are the muscles that cross the front of your hip joint. Very often, there's a lot of tension held through there, and we're lacking the length needed to be able to move the leg back behind us, which decreases the amount of glute use we get when we are walking. So we're going to start with a bolster. You can have a bolster, a rolled up sleeping bag, or blanket also comes in handy. You're going to lie on your back. And then you're going to lift your pelvis up to scooch the bolster underneath your pelvis. And then we're going to bring your knee to your chest. This is going to be your anchor leg. So we're going to have the knee to the chest. And then we're going to extend the opposite leg up towards the ceiling and allow it to float down towards the floor. Check that the pelvis is not coming along for the ride. And you will ideally be feeling a gentle stretch through the front of your hip. And we're just going to hang out here for a little bit. Check that the heel is in line with the knee, is in line with the hip, versus it being floated out towards the side. So we really want to hone in on the hip flexors in this particular position of the hip, knee, and ankle being stacked in the same line. And then we'll bring the knee in and we'll switch sides. So again, we're anchoring the knee to the chest, extending the heel up towards the ceiling, lengthening the leg down towards the floor. And we've got the pelvis in a tucked position, and we're having the thigh bone, the femur, move back behind the pelvis. Ideally, it's going to depend on how much length you have through your hip flexors. By not allowing the pelvis to move as the leg goes down towards the floor, we are really isolating the movement towards the hip joint or at the hip joint. And just notice how things feel a little different on the second side compared to the first. Also see if you can relax the crease of your hip where you're bringing the knee into the chest. And then we'll bring the knee in and bring the feet down to the floor to come off of the bolster. And for this next, we're going to be on our knees. So you may want to have something underneath your knees, a folded up towel, rolled up yoga mat. And we're going to be doing a hinge. And the hinge targets the quadricep muscles, the muscles on the front of your thigh. We're asking them to lengthen as we move back. And we're also asking them to work. So this is what we call an eccentric action versus just a plain vanilla contraction. So go ahead and get yourself situated on your knees. And I just want you to notice, what's it like through the front of your hips? Do you have to work? Do you have to squeeze your glutes to bring the front of your hips to a flat position versus having flexion in them? So just notice, do you have enough yield through your hip flexors to be on your knees without having any flexion or bend in your hip joint? So that's step one. And it would be super common if you noticed you had to squeeze your glutes a bit to get the flexion out of your hips. And then we're going to hinge back. I want you, before we do this, I want you to make sure and promise me you will breathe throughout. Okay, no holding your breath to make up for any strength gaps. So we'll go ahead and hinge back. The only thing that's changing is the angle at the knee joint. The torso is staying the same. The hips are staying the same. Here we go. Going back And then we're coming up, breathing, and we're going back. And coming up. Now, as we move into these two more that we're going to do, I want you to check in with the position of your rib cage. We want to get the ribs aligned over the pelvis, and this, lifting the chest and having a straight back, is not what we're after. I want the front of your ribs to be stacked over the front of your pelvis. So 99.9% of the time, that's going to mean you will need to relax your ribs down, which will feel slumpy, okay? But I promise it's better for your back, it's better for your core. So now as we hinge back, I want you to maintain this position with your rib cage and your pelvis. And here we go. So watch the tendency to want to pop the ribs up to help yourself up, okay? That's what you don't want to do. So we're going to relax the ribs down, and we're going to hinge back. And as you come up, it's all about the legs, not the ribs. All right. Now we're going to come back down to the floor and go ahead and have something under your head so that you are supported and your chin isn't jutting up towards the ceiling. You're going to have knees bent, and feet are going to be a little bit wider than pelvis width. Check that the outside edges of your feet are straight, so watch for that tendency to turn out. And from here, we're going to push down through the heels. We're going to tuck the pelvis under and peel the pelvis off the floor, up and up. And then we're going to roll back down, vertebrae by vertebrae, keeping that tuck in the pelvis. And then bringing the pelvis back down to the floor and untucking. And we'll do this again. So you're driving the motion by pushing down through your feet to float the pelvis up off the floor as you peel it off, vertebrae by vertebrae. And then we're floating it back down, nice and controlled. So the tendency is going to be to untuck and clunk down. And reach the floor, let the pelvis untuck. And again, we're tucking the pelvis, peeling it off. So we're working through this range of motion as we come up, where we are asking the hip flexors to lengthen enough to allow us to have this straight line at the hip joint. So we're not flexing. Go ahead and hang out here at the top for a minute. I want you to think about pushing down through the floor. I should say down through your feet. And then I want you to also think about dragging your feet up towards your head without moving your feet. So your feet aren't actually moving, but you're thinking about pulling your feet towards your head, which is going to activate your hamstrings in a delightful way. And then we're going to relax that and roll back down vertebrae by vertebrae. So we're getting the glutes and we're getting the hamstrings, and then we're also asking the quads and the hip flexors to yield enough to allow the hip joint to straighten. And then we're going to move into a supported squat using my favorite training wheels technique, the strap. And as you come here, you're going to have your feet a little bit wider than hip width. You're going to walk yourself back enough that your arms are fully extended. And you get to decide how low you go into the squat. You can go a little bit or you can go all the way down. You know what's best for your body. So I encourage you to respect your body and not force things to happen that your body is not ready for. And we'll go ahead and lower ourselves down, allowing the torso to move through the legs if you're going all the way down, working to keep the shins vertical. And then we're going to push down through the feet, backing the pelvis up as we come to an upright position. And we'll do another one, coming down, keeping the shins vertical, keeping the pelvis backed up behind you, and come to your end point, wherever that is, and just check in. Can you loosen your grip on the strap? Can you allow your torso to come forward a little bit more? Back your pelvis up a little bit more, and then push down and back to come up. All right, we're going to do 2 more. This time I want you to pay attention to what's happening with your ribs. So there's a tendency to pop the ribs out as you lower down, and there's a tendency to pop the ribs up as you come out to kind of help leverage or heave-ho or use momentum to drive your movement. We really want the legs to drive your movement and your glutes. So start by relaxing the ribs down, which again will feel slumpy. And then we're going to come down, keeping the ribs relaxed down. Don't let them pop out. Letting the torso come through the legs. And then now we're going to come up, but I want you to do that without leading with your ribs. Ribs down, ribs down, ribs down, ribs down, ribs down. And one more. Check that they're down to begin, and then we'll lower down. Keeping the pelvis backed up, keeping those shins vertical as much as possible. And reaching your end point. And then driving it up, keeping the ribs down. And there you go. All right, my friends, hope you enjoyed that. You can run through it a second time if you have the time and get even more juice out of this. Enjoy.